My name is Angel. I am not the little girl in the hospital bed anymore. I am 26 now. I walk without monitors attached to me. I breathe without machines helping me. But there was a time when the doctors did not speak about my future in years. They spoke in weeks, sometimes in days. I remember the smell of antiseptic more clearly than the smell of home. I remember the steady beeping of the heart monitor like it was counting down instead of keeping rhythm. I remember the way my mother tried to smile, even when her eyes were red from crying in the hallway. And I remember the day I stopped asking what tomorrow would look like. That was the day I started letting go. I was 8 years old when I decided I was tired. Not tired like a child after playing outside. Tired in a way that felt older than my body. My illness had a long name I couldn't pronounce. I only understood the simple part. It hurt. It kept me inside white walls while other kids went to school. It made my mother sleep in a chair beside my bed. It made doctors whisper outside my door. At night, I would hold my teddy bear and imagine a different life, one where I could run, where I could dance, where I could see the world beyond the hospital window. Music was the only thing that made the room feel bigger. And when Michael Jackson's songs played, something inside me woke up. His voice didn't feel like it belonged to a stage. It felt like it belonged to hope. I wrote him letters, pages and pages in messy handwriting. I told him I loved his music. I told him I imagined him telling me not to give up. I told him I was brave because my mom said so, but that I thought he was braver. I didn't really believe he would ever read them. It was enough to pretend he might. Sometimes I would close my eyes and picture him dancing in the corner of my hospital room, smiling at me, telling me that this was not the end of my story. On the day the doctors told my mother that my body was not responding well to treatment, I stopped asking for music. I turned away from the window. I felt smaller than the bed I was lying in. What I didn't know was that one of my letters had traveled farther than I ever imagined. I didn't know that somewhere in a quiet room, Michael was reading words written by a little girl who felt like she was fading. My mother told me later that he had seen a short video I recorded for him. In it, I tried to sound strong. I said I loved him. I said his music made me happy even when I wasn't feeling good. I didn't tell him that I was scared. Children don't always say the scariest part out loud. The day he came to the hospital, I thought I was dreaming. The door opened softly. I remember the light from the hallway stretching across the floor before I saw his silhouette. My heart monitor sped up before my mind caught up. He walked in without an entourage, without cameras, without noise. Just him, gentle, real. I remember whispering, "You're really here." My voice sounded smaller than I expected. He smiled in a way that felt warm, not famous. I asked him to squeeze my hand. I needed to feel something solid, something that told me this moment wasn't part of another dream. He squeezed my hand carefully, like he was holding something fragile and important. In that touch, there was no pity. There was presence. We didn't talk about illness much. He didn't ask about statistics. He asked about my favorite song. He hummed softly beside my bed. It wasn't a performance. It was quiet, almost like a secret between us. My mother stood in the corner crying silently, but I didn't feel sad. For the first time in months, I felt seen instead of monitored. He told me something simple. He said, "You don't have to be brave every second. Just be here." I didn't understand how powerful that sentence would become in my life. After he left, something shifted. The doctors noticed it before I did. I started eating a little more. I asked for music again. I asked when the next treatment would be. I started asking about tomorrow. My body did not heal overnight. There was no miracle in the dramatic sense. There were still bad days. There were still nights when the pain made me curl into myself. But the difference was this: I no longer felt alone in the fight. Someone I had never met before that day had walked into my hospital room and treated me like I was more than a diagnosis. Months later, when my condition stabilized enough for me to leave the hospital for short periods, he invited us to a concert. I remember the crowd, the lights, the noise, but what I remember most is looking at the stage and realizing that the same person who could command thousands of voices had once sat quietly beside my bed and hummed for one little girl. That contrast changed how I understood strength. Strength was not volume, it was attention. Years passed. Treatment worked slowly. I grew. I went to school. I learned to walk longer distances. I learned to dream bigger dreams. And I carried one memory with me everywhere I went. A hand squeezing mine in a hospital room, a voice telling me I only had to be here. When I was 18, I started volunteering at a children's hospital. At first, I was afraid. The smell brought back too many memories. The beeping machines echoed in my chest. But then I walked into a room where a little girl was staring at the ceiling the same way I used to. She had stopped asking about tomorrow. I pulled up a chair beside her bed. I didn't start with advice. I didn't talk about bravery. I simply held her hand. Sometimes she asked if I knew anyone famous. I would smile and say that I once met someone who taught me that showing up quietly can change a life. I never made myself the hero of the story, because I wasn't. I was the continuation of a kindness that began long before I understood it. Michael never stayed in my life as a daily presence. He didn't need to. He had already done what mattered. He stepped into a room when hope was thin. He treated a scared child like she still had a future. Today, when people ask me how I survived, I don't talk first about medicine. I talk about connection. I talk about music in a sterile room. I talk about a hand squeeze that reminded me I was still here. I know he touched millions of lives, but I also know this. In one quiet hospital room, he chose to touch mine, and because of that, I grew up. I found purpose. I became the person who walks into rooms where hope is fading and says, without needing applause, you don't have to be brave every second, just be here.